Hey, ladies. How many guys do you know that'll actually stop and ask for directions? Not many? Not at our house. I have stopped and asked for directions maybe twice. And this was before the advent of GPS technology on our phones. We have the ability now to have directions anywhere. More times than not, me asking for directions now consists of, hey, Sherry, pick up the phone and tell me what road I'm looking for. Because more times than not, I know the surroundings. I'm a visual person, so I look for my landmarks. The trouble is that landmarks change. They change the landscape. The last time we went to Peoria, we took a drive down through downtown East Peoria, and if that had not been my hometown, and I, having been somewhere that I know exactly where I'm at and the street names and everything, I'd have been totally lost, because that place looks completely different from it did, 35 years ago. It is a huge difference. Caterpillar, East Peoria was full of Caterpillar buildings where they built the tractors. Those buildings are gone. It's now all a whole bunch of shops and malls and outlet places and Costco and all kinds of other stuff. But guys, we have a tendency to think we know where we're going, and in all actuality, we may know where we're going, but we can't just be aimlessly wandering. Today is Vision Sunday. And vision for a church is a lot like stopping to ask God for directions. We can't just aimlessly wander and expect to get somewhere. We have to take time to stop and ask God, hey, where are we going? 2017 and 18, it was back to the beginning. 2019, last year, was serve. We talked about how to serve. We went through Rooted, which was the book of James. We talked about stewardship. We talked about, we went through the Sermon on the Mount with matters of the heart. And it was in the fall of 2018 in November when I went to the Right Now conference the very first year. We went again last year in 19, but this was back in 18. And Chip Ingram was there. Anybody know who Chip Ingram is? He's a pastor out in California. He's on the radio. If you catch the right station, you can catch him on there. And Chip Ingram was actually one of the speakers at the Right Now conference. And Chip was promoting his new book, and he had given a talk, one of the multiple talks over the few days that were there. And he also had a workshop and a booth set up right outside of the workshop place. And the book that he was promoting was called Real God. Anybody know that? It's been out for about a year and a half now, so it's made its way through the Christian bookstore circles. He was there promoting Real God. And one of the things that he talked about in this workshop was the fact that there's a lot of people in our churches who think they know God. But how well do we really know God? And the basis of the book was called Real God. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. God goes, hey, hello, over here, Ryan, you need to write this down. I can go up in my office and get you the book that I took notes in, and it is right there on that page, and it's 2020. I had gotten the vision for this year. At first, I had titled the theme for this year as Real God, or Know God. It went through a couple of iterations. I started doing study on a couple of the passages that Chip had put forth, one of which was Romans 12:2. And I started doing study, and I went through a couple of iterations of the title. I thought maybe reformed or transformed or renewed. And I went through a couple of different titles, but nothing really communicated what I was trying to get at, or what I believe God was trying to get at. And I was reading Romans 12:2, and God goes, I've already given you the answer. It's right there in front of your nose. You need to read it again. So I read it again, and our 2020 theme is this: renew your mind. It's right there in Romans 12:2. He's like, it's right in front of your face, Ryan. This is the direction you need to go in 2020. I have spent the better part of over a year fleshing out this year. That's the longest I have ever spent on any kind of vision for a church anywhere. I don't spend that long. I usually pick a theme and I go for it. But this year has been very, very different. This has been marinating for the better part of over a year. So why renew your mind? Why Romans 12:2? Romans 12:2 is a very popular verse. You probably know it. And this is what it says. It says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Why Romans 12:2? I started doing some study, and I started kind of going through the old way I used to do things and trying to exegete things, and it was effective and it's good. And I'm looking into different translations of each of the words, and just kind of going through here. And God was like, you need to look at this from another angle than just academic, my son. This is not something that you can do academically. This is something that you need to be able to feel. Okay. Not feel as in emotions, but hear from God. Okay. And this, after a couple of conversations and with a friend of mine and do some really, I cannot tell you how much reflection I have put into this. It has been a lot of reflection. And this is what I've come up with. Okay. Romans 12:2. I'm going to read it again. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Here's the first thing that I picked up on. The point of all of this is to prove what the will of God is. That is the goal. Okay? The goal is to prove the will of God. And we cannot prove the will of God unless something happens first. We are transformed by the renewing of our mind. We cannot prove what the will of God is unless transformation of the mind happens first. It is not possible. That word prove there in the last half, that last part of Romans 12:2, that word means to examine or regard as worthwhile or judge as good. Some of the other translations, and another plug for the app for, from the Faith Life Study Bible, you can do this with this app on your phone, and you can compare these text versions side by side. Let me read a couple, or give you what a couple of the other versions of the Bible translate that word prove as. The Holman Christian Standard Bible translates the word prove as discern. The New Living Translation translates it as learn to know. And the NIV 84 translates it as able to test and approve. So what the idea is proving the will of God. We cannot learn to know the will of God. We cannot discern the will of God. We cannot test and approve the will of God unless the transformation of the mind happens first. Transformation of the mind doesn't happen. You can't prove what the will of God is anyway, anyhow. You can read the Bible as much as you want. But unless there is a transformation of the mind, it ain't going to happen. So there's two parts to this. The first part is God's part. The second part is our part. God's part is this. There has to come from God an opening of the mind. You will not see what the Scripture says in truth until God opens your mind. It is not going to happen any other way. He has got to open your mind first. The second part goes hand in hand with that. God is not going to open the mind of someone who is not asking, seeking, and knocking. If you're not asking for it, if you are not seeking for it, if you are not knocking on the door, asking for God to reveal it to you, He will not reveal it to you. You have got to be asking, seeking, and knocking. There is a part on God, and then there is a part on us. We have personal responsibility in this. We have got to be asking, seeking, and knocking after the truth to know God better. And it's not a guarantee that He will open the Scriptures to you. It's not a guarantee. He doesn't have to. But if He's going to, you have to be seeking it out. The goal, therefore, is this. Our goal is to prove the will of God. Our goal is not transformation of the mind. And you're like, well, how's that? How is our goal prove what the will of God is and it's not transformation of the mind? Transformation of the mind is how we get to the goal. You following? Transformation of the mind is how we get to the goal of proving God's will. How we get to know God better. How we learn to know what the will of God is. This, my friends, is about having a biblical worldview. All a worldview is how you interpret the world around you. We went through it in a sermon last year. Do you interpret the world through a biblical lens? Or do you interpret the world through what you've been taught by secular culture and society? It's only two ways you can interpret it. You can interpret it as the world, or you can interpret it as a biblical world view. This year is all about renewing your mind. It is about seeking the will of God. It is about getting to know God better. With that said, after I've done all of this study, then I go through the process of trying to come up with what kind of sermon series, what are we going to teach, what is the goal? So we've got the goal is renewing your mind, or proving the will of God through renewing your mind. It's a good way to say it. Proving the will of God through renewing your mind, okay? So this is where I've landed for this year. The first sermon series you've already heard. Top Resolution Countdown. And if you'll notice, I did it a little bit different this year. Usually I go through Vision Sunday, the first Sunday of the year in January, and then I will go through all the sermon series. But this year I did it a little bit different. I'm doing it on Super Bowl Sunday, and you've already had one of the sermon series under your belt. So as I go through this renewing of your mind, the goal is I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here kind of tying all this in. But what I'm going to do is we're not going to rehash the top resolutions. I'm going to show you how this fits in with the goal of renewing your mind. Okay? So the 2020 goal is to renew your mind. And the Top Resolution Countdown was the first sermon series in that 2020 Renew Your Mind. Okay? We went through addictions, we went through more family time, we went through budgeting, and we went through losing weight. None of which can change unless what? You renew your mind, right? We laid that out over and over and over again in each one of those 4 sermons. You notice that I said that almost every week. That's why. Is because the goal is the fact that we need to renew our mind. You know, you're not going to get past an addiction if you're not transformed by the renewing of your mind. If you don't have a biblical worldview about how addictions and spending family time and prioritizing your life, or prioritizing your budget, or prioritizing your health management, because that's what losing weight. It's about your health. It's about taking care of you. None of that's going to happen if you don't have a biblical worldview about it. Okay? So that was the first sermon series of 2020. That was the first Renew Your Mind. The next sermon series that's coming up, this starts next week. And this sermon series is called The Greatest Magic Show on Earth. The picture that I was looking for didn't exist, so if the picture looks a little cheesy, I had to create it myself, because there was nothing up there online that I could find that fit what I was looking for. You'll see a picture of a guy standing in the spotlight. He's a magician. He's got the 3-ring circus kind of thing, hat, and he's got his top hat on. You'll notice he's got angel wings on, and there's a light coming from him. And you'll notice that he's got his right hand poofing magic while he's holding something in the background with his left. That book has a picture of Darwin on it. You can't see that from here. But you see, the greatest magic show on earth is the greatest magician ever pulling tricks while he's got his book behind his back, pulling these magic tricks from there. You see, the greatest magic show on earth is going to come straight from Colossians 2:8 that says, "Do not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies." This is an 9 week. It's 8 weeks that I'm preaching. Sherry's going to have one of the sermons in there on a youth Sunday. So it'll be a 5th Sunday, and Sherry will preach that sermon. But it is a 9-week sermon series on the greatest deceptive philosophies that our world will throw at you. And I want you to be warned. Each one of the titles of the sermon is the deceptive philosophy. So when you see it in the bulletin, you'll see the greatest magic show on earth when Cynthia types up the bulletin, and then underneath you'll have the title of the sermon and the scriptures beside it. Don't be thrown off, because some of these titles are going to sound just a little strange. Okay? The first week, next week, is the sermon, What is Truth? It is the greatest, one of the greatest deceptive philosophies on the face of the earth. And that is the question of what is truth. And we'll go ahead and tackle that next week. The next sermon series, that will last us through until Easter. We are going to be spending a lot of time in the book of Galatians. A lot of time. This sermon series, the greatest magic show on earth, is going to be 3/4 of it will be in Galatians. There are other sermon series that we will go back and revisit a lot of these scriptures in Galatians throughout the year. This next one is going to be in April and May. This sermon series is called 2020 Vision. And the goal of this sermon series is to lay down the core gospel verses. What is the gospel? You'll notice it'll be the same 8 verses that I have been writing about. This is going to be the similar sort, it's not going to be the same, but it'll be a similar sort of thing where we're going to lay out the core gospel verses and what is the gospel. You want to know what the gospel is, this is 6 weeks of this is what the gospel is. This is the core gospel verses. The next sermon series after that is going to take us through the rest of May and July, through July, the first week of July. And this one's called Extreme Makeover Spiritual Edition. Take off of the extreme home makeover kind of thing. This one is a spiritual edition. And this one is going to go through the core doctrines. The whole extreme makeover home edition, they go in and these people have got a house that's either too small or it needs to be fixed up or whatever. You've seen the show, right? This is going to be a takeoff of that. And this sermon series is going to be all about the core doctrine that makes up the Christian faith. What are the core doctrines that are more or less essential? Okay. July through September is the next one. And this sermon series is called Check Your Attitude. This is a sermon series through the spiritual disciplines: prayer, fasting, meditation, solitude, silence, worship, celebration, these kind of spiritual disciplines and our attitude towards them. Okay. September and October is going to be it's going to be a sermon series called Relationally Overwhelmed. And I'm going to issue an invitation to the church for everybody to invite one person that you know that is struggling in relationships. Invite them to this sermon series. It is going to be it's not going to be very deep, like deep, like core doctrine deep. But these are, if you're struggling in relationships and you need help, this is the sermon series. Invite somebody. Get them in the doors. Because research shows if you can get somebody new into the church and you can form a new habit, you can get them to come 4 to 6 weeks in a row, you will help them form a new habit. Okay? And a lot of people struggle with relationships. This is something that's very relevant to our world. Okay? Because we all have relationships that are overwhelming, relationships that are completely stressed. The month of November, we are going to tackle a sermon series called Spiritual Wars. Yes, it's taken off of Star Wars. I kind of stole the idea. It's a 4-week sermon series, and this has nothing to do with Star Wars. This has everything to do with spiritual warfare. Obviously. The title of the sermon series is Spiritual Wars for a reason. We are going to talk about spiritual warfare and what it looks like, what it feels like, how, all of the above. Okay? And then at Christmas in December, we are going to have a sermon series called Christmas According to the Polar Express. I liked the Polar Express, but I thought it was awfully worldly the first 7 times we watched it at Christmas time. But then we watched it at my dad's house this past Thanksgiving. And God opened my eyes. I was sitting on the couch, and there was a line in there I can't even, there was a line in there that completely shifted the way I saw that movie. Because there's really, on the surface, the Polar Express doesn't really have anything that is biblical in it. It's about Santa Claus. But Tom Hanks speaks a line in there, and I sat up in my seat and I started taking notes. He goes, sometimes the things that are the most real in our world are the things that you can't see. And I was like, whoa. Whoa. So we went back and I watched it again from the beginning with this new set of lens. Oh my gosh. I cannot wait to share with you some of the things that I have found in this movie that are a gold mine of biblical truths that we need to renew our mind with. So we're going to do Christmas according to the Polar Express. Here is what our goal for the year is. This is the goal. The goal is to solidify the core values, doctrine, all of the above. This is to solidify the core things in us. That is what this sermon, this whole year is about. It is about solidifying these things in us. It's designed to, number one, it's designed to grow your faith. It is designed to, number two, teach you doctrine. And number three, it is designed to answer the questions that we are all asking. The spiritual wars is very heavy on that front. Answering the questions that we are all asking. What is spiritual warfare? How does it take place? What does it look like? Is it really this kind of is it really this kind of hokey kind of thing, or is there some real truth to the thing? Here's just let me kind of whet your appetite a little bit about spiritual warfare. Let me whet your appetite a bit. The coronavirus in China. Whether you believe the news media is blowing this up or whether you believe it's actually valid is irrelevant. It is irrelevant. What's going on in China right now besides the coronavirus? The gospel is spreading like wildfire. You want to know what the coronavirus is? It is a spiritual attack. I kid you not. When I realized that, I'm like, oh my gosh, of course it is. Regardless of what you think about how the news media is playing it off, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. This is a spiritual attack. Now, the numbers I saw yesterday, it's 7,200 people have contracted it and 170 people have died from it. That is 2.4% of the people who are contracting it are dying from it. SARS was a little bit worse. It killed 30 to 40% of the people that it got a hold of. The numbers could rise depending on if it migrates other places or not. But regardless of what you think about it, China is going through a whole bunch of spiritual attacks because the gospel is spreading like wildfire. Iran, the gospel is spreading like wildfire. There are literally, I read an article from missionaries this week. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people being saved in Iran. Literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to faith in Jesus Christ. Iran is under a huge spiritual attack right now. Satan doesn't like it when we move in on his territory. He's going to come at you with guns blazing, guys. And I'm reading through Jude right at the moment in my personal study, and I'm gonna throw this out at you. Not even Michael rebuked Satan. What did he say? The Lord rebuke you. You go rebuking Satan, you're in some dangerous territory. You let the Lord rebuke him, because he's the one who's got the power, not you. Spiritual warfare is a very, very touchy place. Again, that's just kind of to whet our appetite a little bit. Next week, the greatest magic show on earth. I have to keep from saying what I took it from a movie. It's The Greatest Showman. Yeah, I took the idea of the sermon series from The Greatest Showman. The sermon series is nothing like the movie. I just took it because the idea of the, it's like, ooh, he's, kind of, ooh, magic kind of thing. And because essentially that's what the enemy does to us. And the whole point of the greatest magic show on earth is exposing the lies. Because when you expose the lies, what happens? You take the power from the lie, right? That's the whole goal of this, is to expose the lies. And yeah, it just exposes it to the light, and it takes the power away from it. What is truth? It's a sermon next week. It's good stuff. I'm working on that series right at the moment. Where are you at today? Don't go through your own spiritual life, regardless of how God is directing us here at the church. I would like to see the renewing of the mind, kind of take hold in your life as well. But where is God leading you in particular? Something for me is, this whole renew your minds bit has been in me for a better part of a year. I see things completely different than I did a year ago today. I want to invite you to do the same. Let God renew your mind so that you can prove, that you can learn to know who he really is.